Welcome back to another mini episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. And today I'm going to talk about an idea that I was listening to someone called Attachment Adam on Instagram, and he really beautifully articulated something that I've been thinking about and trying to explain to people, but not been able to explain it in the level of clarity and depth that he has. And I'm also going to add on some of my kind of thoughts and ideas about this. And it's all about really the dating world and how the dating world exists in kind of two different worlds that are on a spectrum from one to the other. And inside these dating worlds, we see on one side, things like, the red pill world making sense and being correct. And on the other side, a lot of what we say about secure attachment and healing and stuff like that also being correct. So let me start with on the left-hand side, right? Imagine on the left-hand side. On the left-hand side of this world, you have people who are highly insecurely attached. These are people who maybe grew up in very dysfunctional households, where love wasn't given, love was withheld. People who, maybe came from very severely broken homes. Myself, I came from, my mum's a single parent of 4. So it's definitely, I exist. This is a world that I know well, right? Inside this world, people are living out of their trauma, right? They're just reliving their trauma without any awareness that they often even experience trauma. They're just reliving it out. So it might be fatherlessness, for instance, right? Just reliving that out. And it's on this left-hand side, right? I'm still on the left-hand side. On this side, also, people are living in their patterns, their dysfunctional patterns of withdrawal, of closure, of reactivity. An example could be that, where if someone says something to you about you, let's say from someone says, I don't know, where did you get your trainers? And the person then interprets that as someone saying that they can't afford the trainers they're wearing, or they must have stole them or something like that. There's a pattern in there of like being defensive or thinking other people think of you a certain way and then reacting to them inside that way. Again, we're still in the left-hand side, right, of this world. And on this left-hand side, people, their thoughts are the reality. What they think is how the world is. So if I think that people think that I don't deserve to be respected, that is how I see the world. That is how I view the world, and that is what I see as truth. I don't even question it, it's just how it is, for instance. And on this left-hand side still, there's a lot of protection of ego. Relationships and dating are about money, status, good looks, economic value, sex is currency. It's a kind of, on this side of the spectrum, you've got that, ultimately everything's quite superficial. Right? Superficial from the point of view of dating, of relationships. Communication could be rooted in manipulation, in lying, one-upmanship, trying to take from others, not really seeing relationships as a co-created experience, but in fact seeing it as like a battle, one against the other. And this is where, say, some of the stuff that the red pill guys often say actually rings true inside this reality, right? Also inside here, you can see people get their confidence from purely external validation, like money, being good looking, being young, yada, 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 right? We have TV programs that exist inside of this reality. So for instance, Love Island's a good example. Love Island personifies this kind of world, very much so. Also, one of the kind of tenets, if you're staying on this side, is that you believe that people do not change. People are the way they are, and that's the way they are. And you often, in this side of the spectrum on the left, you'll see men as being one way and women as being one way, and that is it. Men and women are very much in their boxes of how they are. Women want a man with money and status and good looks and drives nice cars. A man wants a woman who is young, who is fertile, who's good looking, who's not been with too many other men. Those are the sort of rhetorics we get spoken of on this side. And this is the extreme side, right? I'm talking about here. Right, so this is on the extreme side. So we'll call this kind of... we'll call this the insecure side, right? From an attachment point of view, right? We'll call it insecure and unhealed, actually, right? Now, on the other side, on the right-hand side, we'll call this secure attachment and healing, right? On this side, people are healing their trauma, or have healed their trauma as much as they can, and continue to do so, right? They see their patterns. They They see them, they don't live in them. They observe them, maybe they come out sometimes, but they observe that their patterns are not who they are. Their patterns of fear, of commitment, for instance, they know that this is a wounding, this is a way of thinking that's always been programmed into them that they didn't choose, but they are healing from it and creating space that they make different conscious choices from that, right? On this right-hand side, people see that the thoughts that pass through our minds are just thoughts. They're not necessarily the way the world is. Like if I have a thought that I'm not good enough, I don't live my life from the lens of that or view that everyone else looks at me in that way, right? I know that as my thought and it has no bearing on reality other than what I put it into reality and other people. This is also on this side where we start to see that we have unconscious beliefs, right? And we start to heal from those unconscious beliefs or instill new beliefs that we want to live from, right? On the right-hand side, you've got dating becomes about communication, becomes about compassion, about connection, like real deep and meaningful connection, understanding, and a level of consciousness, right? And understanding and having emotional openness, emotional intimacy. Sexual intimacy goes beyond just two bodies selfishly rubbing together, but actually a deeper experience of people's desires and wants and a co-created experience of sex and relationships, right? On this right-hand side, they're emotionally authentic. They're trying to be more authentic. They're trying to come from who they are. They're trying to support each other in relationships, right? And these are the two worlds on the end of each of the spectrum of you can call it the whole of our kind of society, but also I'm talking about in terms of dating. And this is where, if you look on the left-hand side, the unsecure, unhealed, this is where like red pill live. You know, they say this is how the world is and you can't change it. These are the rules of the world and we can only live in the rules of the world. And if you're on that left-hand side, right, and you're there, right, that's like damaged people connecting with damaged people, right, and creating more damage. They then have children, they have relationships that make them even more traumatized, that traumatize their children and so forth, right? And that's where, you know, inside the rules of that, red pill are correct, right? They're not wrong, but it's damaged people connecting with damaged people, right? And it's also in the ideology of like, it can't change, which isn't true, because many of you, and I know for myself, have experienced a more healed and secured relationship, right? The relationship I'm in now with Orsa is a lot more secure, especially basically me, right? To be honest, on my side is I am more secure. I have done more healing, so I can connect and communicate in a way that is far superior than I used to, right? And these two worlds end up on a spectrum, right? And we can move from the left, the unhealed and insecure through doing work. By doing the work, right? By looking at our trauma, by healing, by looking at the way we communicate, looking at how we think about ourselves and the world, right? And I know this because I've done this work myself and I do it with clients all the time, right? And to move along some people add into this, some people will be born into a world where they were more secure and more healed, just simply because of their family lineage and their parents, right? For instance, I was born quite far into the insecure and unhealed. My parents aren't together. They broke up. I come from a long line of fatherlessness in my family on both sides, my mum and my dad. They're both immigrant, they're both black, right? So all the stuff that would have happened would really, because there are some aspects of what I used to believe the way that men and women were, but would probably fit into some of the red pill ideology. Maybe not as extreme, but definitely the way I used to see things, right? And it's only through my own healing, working with clients and seeing their healing and how that affects their dating life and their relationship and how that shifts. And this is the thing, people, right? If you are listening to this, the chances are you want a more securely connected, deep and meaningful relationship where there's openness and there's honesty and there's compassion, there's love, and there's the ability to be like, oh my God, I'm scared of commitment, but we can still be in a relationship together, right? That is what a lot of us want. That's what we're moving towards, I think, as a society, as a whole. The problem is that as a society, And through the media, we're sitting in a world of unhealed and insecure, and that's how we see the world, and we think the world is only that way. Now, when you start getting into the work that I do, healing, the coaching world, you realize that we can change as people. We can shift and change out of the bondage, out of the trauma, out of the insecurity that we grew up in, and we can move into a way in which we communicate more honestly. We see our own patterns. We start to live out of beliefs that we choose instead of beliefs that have been programmed into us, right? And this changes your life, right? This is absolutely changes your life. But if you don't want to do the work and you just see the world as this very fixed place of trauma, of insecurity, insecure attachment, then that's all you're going to experience, right? Now, I guess the problem also comes is that, when we're dating, a lot of us are wanting to be in more securely attached relationships. And the continuum is a long continuum, and people are at different places in that continuum. But ultimately, the most important thing I would say when you're meeting someone, you're trying to find a relationship, is that they are trying to move along the continuum towards being secure, being healed, being authentically self-expressed, communicating better, observing their patterns and beliefs instead of living out of them. That is the thing that we want, right? People who are doing the work. Because ultimately, unless you meet someone who just happens to be very securely attached and very much not saddled with that much trauma and able to communicate through their family lineage of the homes they grew up in, a lot of people are really quite traumatized, right? Let's be honest. If you think of most cultures, like I come from, like I said, my parents are Jamaican. It's a traumatized culture. It can be very violent. It can be hypersexualized, and so forth. And we bring those into our relationships. We bring those ideas into our families. And the work is to become, more self-generated, more whole, more self-led, and not be living out of our patterns and habits. And ultimately, that has a huge influence on our dating lives and our relationships. And also inside of dating, one of the problems is you might meet someone who you think is further along the continuum towards the right, towards being secure, than they actually are, or more than they actually think, or less. They might be less secure than they think they are, right? That's probably going to be a very common thing for people, right? Or some people think they're doing a lot of work when really they're not really doing any work to move along. I come across this a lot in my coaching work. Men who are like, I'm doing the work to communicate better. And I say men because I work with men. I'm not saying that women don't do that, because women definitely do too. But the men are saying they're doing all this work, and then we start working together, and they start to blow their mind. They're like, oh my God, David, I didn't realize I was communicating like this. I was communicating from a place of assuming rejection, or I was communicating from a place of where I assumed all women didn't like me, or I communicated from a place that I was unattractive because I didn't have money and blah, blah, blah. And then when we start working together, they start to see that that isn't how the world is, or that isn't who they actually are. And they start to move along the continuum, right? But I'm put this podcast together really is to say, look, there's these two ends of a spectrum, right? And I describe them as two worlds, but they are on a spectrum because you can move from one side to the other, and you can go backwards as well. And it's really important for us to take a long, hard look at ourselves and our self-awareness in this, because it's a very hard thing to do on your own. I know from doing all the work that I've done, all the retreats, all the workshops, all the coaches I've had, that it's when other people reflect to you how you're being is when you really open your eyes and you start to do something about it. Because when we're blaming and we're going, well, that's just how all men are, or that's how all women are. Women only want men with money, or women only want men with status, and so forth. We are living inside. We are assuming that everyone else is insecure and is living out of their trauma. And that is not true. There is a population of people, which I constantly meet and talk to, who are actively trying to heal and actively trying to be better and actively trying to observe their own patterns, their own thinking, their own trauma, and to see it not as the truth, but just as a set of pre-programmed programs that have been put inside them from society or from their own family. And it's when we start to create that space from that's who I am to that's what's been part of my life, we start to create the space to change our outcomes and what happens to us. And I guess you probably listen to this and go, okay, so how do I move along the spectrum? And I've kind of said it there, right? But actually it's not, it's a long work. It's a long time. And obviously once you start having the willingness to move along, you'll start to meet different people and so forth. You'll start to find yourself in different circles of people. That's definitely something that I found. I would say that in my kind of mid-20s, I was probably in the circles where everyone was kind of insecurely attached, and we just dated from that assumption. Like, you played all these like mind games in dating. You know, the whole pickup scene is based around the idea of insecure attachment. But what would happen is if you come across someone in that world of pickup, if you came across someone who was securely attached, which I definitely regularly did, they didn't involve themselves in the games because it didn't apply to them. I remember meeting plenty of women who I would start talking to, and I'd be like playing hot and cold, and they would just say, hey, David, like, you're doing this kind of hot and cold thing. I'm not really into this. Like, if you want this to go somewhere, I just want consistency. And if you don't want it to go anywhere, please tell me. Right? Whereas some women would like play the game like, oh, he's gone cold, I'll put more energy in, and back and forth, right? And there's various strategies, but the thing is that we can get out of that. And I would say a large proportion of society is living in trauma, living in insecure attachment, right? And unhealed patterns. That is true. You can see it from the TV we watch, the reality TV we watch, and so forth. But there's also a large population of people, more and more now, who are doing the work to be more securely attached, to have better communication, to fall in love with things like values and authenticity and emotional openness and so forth. So don't believe that the way it is for you, especially if you are not meeting people who are, more securely attached, is how it always has to be. It can change, right? We are not fixed human beings. So I hope this was super useful. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I've said. Feel free to drop me an email at hello@theauthenticman.net, or you can get me on Instagram, which is @theauthenticman_. I'd love to see what your insights are and takeaways from what I've said, how this could change how you go about dating maybe, or has it changed how you feel about yourself and your own capabilities and prospects in the dating and relationship world. And yeah, maybe you've heard this and you thought, oh God, I can definitely see where I just live out of my assumed patterns of how the world is. I'll say this one thing, it's very difficult, and I say this because I'm a coach and I see many men, it's very difficult to see your own patterns, because you need to have someone in front of you who can, through conversation, through embodiment, through whatever, show you how you're being, and for you to have the awareness to go, yeah, I can see what you're saying. I can see how that is hurting me. So if that's you and you want to do that sort of work, then please get in contact with me. We can have a conversation how we can work together and help you improve your dating life and your relationships, because how it has always been doesn't have to be how it always is going to be. I've worked with many men who've gone from being highly anxious in dating and can't find dates, are painfully nervous, to men who show up on dates confidently and creating deep and meaningful connection. And I've worked with men who are in relationship who are highly avoidant, who assume their partner's always trying to belittle them or put them down or trying to control them. And through working together, they've started to see that a lot of that assumptions come from them, and their partners are actually more loving and open and kind and willing to communicate than they thought before. But love to hear your thoughts. Until next week, ciao, ciao.